They said the train left at 9:03, but when it did, she was still standing there alone, clutching a suitcase too old for its hinges and a paper bonnet she'd sewn herself. No one came to greet her. No name was called. No hand extended. Just a few townsfolk passing by, glancing once then away, as if she were already a ghost. Maribeth Reed, 58, was used to being overlooked. A woman too old, too plain, too past her time, or so the world kept telling her. She'd answered a mail-order ad with more hope than belief. A man had written to her, said he was ready to settle down, ready for peace. She stitched him a scarf, packed up her life, boarded a train, but what she didn't know was that the man who'd written her had married someone younger the week before. He never told her, just let her ride 2 states for nothing but shame. Most would have cried, but Maribeth didn't cry. She just sat down on her trunk, quiet, dignified, like the last leaf holding on in autumn. And maybe that's why he noticed her. A man not looking for a wife, not looking for anything really, just passing through with a quiet team of mules and grief still pressed into the lines of his hands. Elam Granger, a widower with silence for company and 5 children growing up faster than he could hold on. He didn't say much when he saw her, just tipped his hat and offered her a ride not out of rescue but because he knew the taste of being left behind. She was left at the station, but what she found wasn't just a second chance at love, it was a home she never thought she'd be welcome in. So what happened when her heart dared to open again? And what did a quiet rancher give her that no man ever had? Stay with us. You won't want to miss what happens next, because some love stories don't come with fireworks, just a gentle voice that says, you don't have to be alone anymore. They say the station at Elkhorn was where things were either picked up or left behind. That summer, Maribeth Cole arrived on the 312 train with 2 worn satchels, a jar of preserves wrapped in cloth, and the kind of hope that makes a woman stand taller than the world has told her she should. She wore her best dress, faded lilac, pressed the night before. It once belonged to her sister, now long gone, but it carried in its seams the memory of gentler touch. Her graying hair was pinned up neat, and her boots had been resoled just 2 months prior, when she still believed in the promises written by a man she'd never met. He had signed his name, Harlan Fitch, a rancher, 59, widowed, said he needed a partner more than a wife, someone with soft hands and a quiet spirit. Maribeth answered his letter after staring at it for 3 nights straight. Her own life in Brookside had become as hollow as the church bells that still rang long after no one came. She told no one she was leaving, just placed her house key in the windowsill and locked the door from the outside with a nail. But when she stepped off that train in Elkhorn, there was no Harlan Fitch, no wagon, no note, just a station agent named Pete chewing tobacco who muttered, "Ain't seen him in weeks." That was it. 58 years old, left on a cracked wooden platform under a sun too bright to cry beneath. She didn't sob, not at first, just sat down on a bench that splintered her stocking and waited with her hands folded. She'd been forgotten before, but this time it had taken 3 states and a train ticket to prove it. Maribeth hadn't always been invisible. There was a time, brief and golden, when a boy named Samuel Brackett carved her initials into a sycamore tree and kissed her hair in the churchyard. But Samuel married someone else, and Maribeth's parents, tired of her barrenness, offered her up to the first traveling tinsmith who needed a cook. That man drank and shouted, and after 6 years disappeared with a younger woman who could give him boys. What remained of Maribeth's heart she folded into silence. She taught Sunday school, sewed dresses for neighbor girls, walked home alone and baked pies for families that pitied her. But she never stopped being kind. Kindness was her rebellion, her armor, her whisper to the world, "I will not become what hurt me." Back at the Elkhorn depot, the sun dipped low. Still no one came. Even the station agent stopped checking on her. Until just before dusk when a shadow fell across her boots. He was tall, worn denim, a button missing on his cuff. He looked at her like he recognized something, not her face, but the quiet she wore. His voice was soft, like boots on dirt. "You waiting on Harlan Fitch?" Maribeth blinked up, startled. "Yeah, but—" "He ain't coming," the man said. "Died 3 days ago. Fell from his horse in the canyon trail. I helped bury him." A pause hung between them like dusk light between fence posts. "I'm Elam Granger," he added. Neighbor, if you need shelter tonight, ma'am, there's room at my place. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she couldn't remember the last time someone offered her a choice, not a command. The light dimmed. The crickets began. And Maribeth Cole, left by one man, stood slowly to walk with another. Not toward love, just toward decency. Sometimes that's where it begins. But what will she find beneath Elam's silence? And can a woman who's always been left behind learn to stay? Elam Granger didn't speak much on the ride home. But he did glance over now, and then, just to be sure, Maribeth was still beside him in the wagon seat. The road wound through low hills and forgotten fences, fields grown wild with grief and grass. She noticed his hands, first browned, broad-scarred from work. They rested quiet on the reins, steady as dusk itself. "You live alone?" she asked when the silence became heavier than the sky. He nodded. "Used to be 6 of us. Now it's just me. And the land." She didn't ask what happened to the 5. She learned the hard way that some names aren't meant to be spoken aloud until they're offered freely. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and watched the sun dip low over cottonwoods. By the time they reached the homestead, the light was purple. Dust hung in the air like breath caught mid-sigh. His house wasn't big, but it was clean in the way of men who try their best without knowing curtains. A wooden porch, one porch chair, the smell of wood smoke and old stew still warming on the stove. "I'll take the cot by the fire," Elam said gently, "if you don't mind the bed." She paused in the doorway. "I didn't expect kindness. I didn't expect a woman left at the depot with nothing but preserves and dignity," he said, not looking at her. And that was that. That night, Maribeth lay awake staring at the knot in the ceiling beam. It looked like a horse's eye, round, full, silent. She thought of the last man who made space for her. He'd done it with grunts and rules, not courtesy. But here in Elam's cabin, no one told her where to sit, what to cook, or what she owed for the roof above her. No wedding bands were forced, no expectations whispered. He just left the lamp burning low on the kitchen table, so she could find her way if she woke in the night. The next morning she rose early, before the rooster, before Elam stirred. She found flour biscuits, a bit of dried apple. She made breakfast not from duty, but from a place deeper than that. A place she'd buried long ago under shame and survival. It felt strange stirring warmth into something again. Elam entered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You didn't have to, I know," she said, setting down a chipped plate. "That's why I did." They ate in silence, but it was a different silence now. Not the emptiness of strangers, but the calm of 2 people who had nothing to prove and no one to impress. After he asked gently, "You have anywhere else to go?" She looked down, then up. "No." He nodded. "Then stay, as long as you like." She should have asked what stay meant, should have clarified terms. But all she did was fold the dish towel in half, lay it over the oven rail, and say, "All right." And so the days passed, not as lovers, not even yet as friends, but as 2 people choosing the same quiet again and again. She patched his shirts. He mended a step on the porch where she nearly tripped. They didn't speak of the future, or of love, but they did speak of what to plant come spring. What Maribeth didn't know, couldn't have known, was that love had already begun. Not with fire, but with something slower, like roots. But can 2 people build something real from silence and second chances, especially when ghosts from the past come knocking? Maribeth wasn't used to kindness that stayed. She'd known plenty of sweet beginnings, flowers brought once, and never again, words whispered only when someone wanted something in return. But Elam's kindness was quieter, ongoing, like a stream that didn't shout but never stopped running. And yet, it scared her more than cruelty ever had. Because what if she began to expect it? What if she hoped? One morning, as frost clung to the window and the coffee pot gurgled over the fire, Maribeth found her hand trembling. She'd been cutting biscuits. Just biscuits. But her breath hitched like something in her chest was trying to warn her. It had been a week since she arrived. No one had claimed her. No one had come looking. Not even the man she was supposed to marry, a man who had at one point sent letters calling her his last hope, only to never meet her train. Was she relieved? Was she abandoned again? Elam didn't ask, but he watched. That evening, she found him in the barn, fixing a broken hinge on the mule gate. She brought him water warm with lemon balm. Why haven't you asked, she said, voice barely louder than the wind. He turned, wiped his hands on a rag. About the man who didn't show. She nodded. I figured if you wanted to talk about him, you would. That stunned her more than any demand might have. His restraint, his respect. I wasn't supposed to come here, she said at last, fingers gripping the rim of the tin cup. I was promised to someone in Dead Elm. His name was Mr. Cargill. He was older, widowed. He wanted a companion. I answered because I was tired of being alone, but mostly because I thought I had no more choices. She looked down. And I guess he thought better of me, or never thought of me at all. Elam stood quiet a moment. Then he said, his loss. He turned back to the hinge, and she stood there, not sure whether to cry or laugh or simply breathe. But healing isn't a straight path. Later that week, when Elam's cousin Mira visited from town bringing lye soap and gossip, her eyes lingered too long on Maribeth. She's staying long, Mira asked, lips tight. She's welcome, Elam replied. Mira raised a brow. Well, folks'll wonder. Elam shrugged. Let 'em. But Maribeth heard. She always heard. Words never had to be loud to bruise. The next day she began packing her things. The preserves, the hymn book, the shawl she'd folded over the rocking chair. When Elam found her, she was folding her apron with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. You leaving? He asked, voice low. She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, I've never stayed anywhere I wasn't merely tolerated. I know how this goes. People see a woman like me past childbearing, past use. They don't see someone worth keeping. I'd rather leave now, before you change your mind. Elam stepped forward. He didn't touch her, didn't plead, but he said, I've lost too much to let someone go just because others can't see her worth. A long pause, then gentler. If you leave, it won't be because of me. Her eyes filled, then cleared. She let the apron slip from her lap, and in that silence something shifted again. Not everything broken needs to be fixed to be kept. Some things just need to be seen. But what happens when the past returns, this time in the flesh, and with claims of his own? It was the third Monday since Maribeth arrived when the train came in with more than mail. She'd just brought in eggs from the coop, 3 brown, 1 cracked and 1 so pale it seemed like bone. A gentle wind tugged her shawl as she crossed the yard, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she had to look behind her. Until she did. A dust-laced man stood in the lane. Broad coat, sharp boots. He held a hat in his hand and a paper in the other, and a stare that pulled all the breath from her chest. Mrs. Thornley, he called out. She froze. That name. The one she hadn't used in years. The one her first husband left bruised into her cheekbone. She hadn't heard it since before she buried him, and the years that followed in silence. Elam stepped from the barn, wiping his hands with a rag. His body moved slow, but his eyes took everything in. Friend of yours, he asked, voice steady. The man grinned too wide. I'm Cargill. The one wrote all them letters. Looks like she wandered off my track and onto yours. The name hit Maribeth like a dropped dish. She hadn't seen a photo. Just words on paper, words that had once sounded so lonely they'd echoed in her bones. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Because here was the man who'd begged for companionship and then vanished. A man who now came with swagger, not apology. He looked her up and down. I figured you'd be younger, he muttered, or at least more lively, then turned to Elam. Guess she was just waiting for a better offer. Elam didn't flinch, but he stepped closer to Maribeth, slow and firm, like weather settling in. She felt his presence like a shelter pulling overhead. You left her at the station, Elam said. Cargill shrugged. I changed my mind, and now she still owes me a reply. That was the agreement. Maribeth stepped forward now, voice clear. You don't get to claim what you discarded. Cargill's smile soured. Lady, I paid the agency for introduction rights. There's a contract. If you're married now, it's a breach. She's not married, Elam said. Quiet, but she's not yours either. Cargill's mouth twitched. He didn't like losing ground. She's got no family. No name but the one her dead husband gave her. No children. What makes her yours to keep? Elam tilted his head, gaze steady. Because she chose to stay. The words hung in the air like bells ringing across open land. Maribeth felt her knees go loose, but her back stayed straight. She looked at Cargill and finally saw at the cold in his eyes, the hollowness in his offer. And she knew no papers could make her his. No loneliness justified treating someone like a returnable parcel. That night, after the dust of Cargill's retreat had settled and supper sat warm on the stove, Maribeth sat beside Elam on the porch. She didn't say much. Neither did he. But he passed her a mug of coffee and said, "If you'd ever rather go, I won't stop you." She smiled small and real. "I think I'd rather plant onions tomorrow," she whispered. And just like that, her choice became a seed. But even in new soil, old doubts can rise like weeds. Will she believe she belongs for good this time? Spring had a way of stirring up things buried deep. The river thawed, the ground softened, and so did the questions Maribeth tried to keep under her apron strings. It had been nearly a month since Cargill turned back on his heels and left boot prints fading down the lane, like a bad story she didn't finish reading. But not every echo goes quiet just because a door closed. That night still replayed in her mind like a hymn half forgotten. Elam's voice saying she chose to stay. But had she? Did she choose to stay because she wanted this life? Or because there was nowhere else left to go? Some mornings the ranch felt like it belonged to someone else. Not hostile, but not quite hers. The children were kind, polite. But polite was different from belonging. When Elam's middle daughter Letty scraped her knee and ran past Maribeth to find her older sister, instead it stung in a quiet place she couldn't name. That night, Maribeth sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to sleep, mending socks that weren't hers, wondering if kindness was enough, if being useful was all she could offer again. The next day, while gathering wood behind the barn, she found a small grave tucked under the cottonwoods, a smooth stone hand-carved. Rachel, beloved. Below it, the smaller one, James, son. She stood there a long while, fingertips brushing the weathered letters. She didn't ask Elam about it that evening, but the next morning he answered anyway. She was 38 when the fever came, he said, over coffee, voice low. Boy didn't make it through the week. Maribeth held her mug steady. Did you bury them yourself, she asked. He nodded. There weren't many hands left in town by then. I carved the stones at night. Thought I'd make a better one someday. She looked at him. They're beautiful. For the first time since she arrived, he looked right at her. I never asked you, why did you come? She hesitated. Because I read your ad, and it felt like someone was finally speaking to me, not at me. He nodded, then asked gently, do you feel like you've arrived, or just escaped? The honesty cut sharp, but it didn't wound. She looked out the window. The wheatgrass moved in waves. I'm still deciding, she whispered. Later that week, Maribeth took to the trail past the creek. Alone. She walked for a long time until the ranch was a memory behind her. There in the hush of tall grass and broken fence line, she sat and cried. Not from pain, but from the weight of being seen, from the terror of finally wanting to stay, and the fear she might not be wanted in return. When she returned, the youngest boy, Finn, was waiting on the porch. I kept your shawl inside, he said, handing it to her with shy eyes. She blinked back something too big to name. Thank you, Finn. He grinned. Papa made cornbread. He saved you the end piece. Says it's the best part. That night she ate it slowly. And when Elam passed her the stew, their hands touched. It wasn't a thunderclap, just a flicker of warmth across cool skin. But it felt like the beginning of choosing, not surviving. But when you start to believe in a place, the fear of losing it grows louder. Can she risk loving what she never thought she'd have? There are silences that hurt, and then there are silences that heal. In the weeks that followed, Maribeth noticed how the silence between her and Elam changed shape. It no longer felt like a wall, but a bridge, quiet, sure, stretching gently between them, plank by plank. She'd rise with the dawn to knead bread beside the older girls, hang linens with Letty, who now offered small smiles unprompted. The boys asked her things about buttons, about birds, even about why the moon seemed to follow them on evening walks. And Elam. He never rushed her, never demanded anything more than what she freely gave. But he noticed. Every time she set an extra biscuit aside for Finn, or tucked a blanket tighter at night, or sat a little closer by the fire. One Sunday he brought her a parcel wrapped in brown paper. I saw you eyeing this in town, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Inside was a worn second-hand hymnal, its pages delicate but intact. She stared at it like it might disappear. I used to sing, she whispered. Before, well, before it wasn't wanted. Elam sat beside her. You can sing here, Maribeth. That night after supper, she opened the book. Her voice was rusty quiet, but as she sang Come Thou Fount, something unclenched in her chest. The children paused their play. Letty hummed along. Elam closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, Maribeth did not feel barren. She felt full. And then the past came knocking. Literally. A man on horseback rode into the ranch the next morning. Dusty, grinning, hat low, his voice smug as he called out, "Excuse me, I'm looking for a woman named Maribeth Reed. She owe me a promise." The world tilted. Maribeth froze. Every breath she'd worked so hard to steady, shattered. Elam stepped between her and the man before she could speak. "Who are you?" he asked. "Name's Boyd Felder," the man said. "Her fiancé." Silence. "You left Maribeth," said finally, her voice cold. "You didn't show. At the station." He chuckled. "Had a better offer. But turns out she ran off too. Heard from your brother you ended up in the middle of nowhere. Figured you'd still be grateful to marry." Grateful. That word burned. Elam turned to her. "Is this true?" She met his eyes. "He paid my parents. He never spoke kindly. Never waited. Never wanted anything but my silence." Then to Boyd she said, clear as the prairie sky, "You don't own me." Boyd's smile faltered. "I paid for you. You paid for a woman you didn't bother to claim. You didn't buy me. I'm not for sale." She stood tall, back straight. "I came here of my own will. I stay here by choice. And I will not return to a cage just because it's got my name on it." Boyd glared, then spit at the dirt. "You'll regret this," he muttered and rode off. The silence afterward was long, but not cold. Not this time. Elam looked at her. No judgment, no questions, just presence. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, breath shaky. "I think I finally am." That night Elam didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't kiss her. He just set her teacup beside his, as if it had always belonged there. And later when Maribeth lit the lantern in her room, she didn't close the door. Now that she's chosen freedom, can she trust that love might still be waiting in the quiet? They never spoke of marriage. Not in the way folks in town might have expected. No proposals on one knee, no lace, no fuss. But over the next few months, Maribeth Reed and Elam Granger became something that words couldn't quite hold. She stayed. That was the first vow. She stayed when the fence posts needed mending and her hands blistered. When Letty lost her nerve during her first bleed, and Maribeth held her through it like a mother would. When Elam came in late, shoulders slumped from hauling feed, and she waited up bread, still warm. And Elam, he didn't ask her to be anything but who she was. He just noticed. When she winced reaching high shelves, he built a lower one. When she stared too long at a blue scarf in town, he bartered for it behind her back. When she sang alone in the barn, he never interrupted, just stood outside, hand to the doorframe, listening. One afternoon, the children ran through the fields chasing chickens, and Maribeth laughed, really laughed. A sound so full, so round, even the wind hushed to hear it. Elam sat beside her on the porch. "You sound like spring," he said quietly. She looked down, smiled. "I've always felt like winter." He shook his head. "You brought things back to life." That night, as they sat at the table, the children chatting, sun slipping low, Elam stood and cleared his throat. "I'd like to say grace." The children went quiet. He reached across the table and Maribeth took his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for giving back what I thought I'd lost hope, laughter, and someone to share the porch swing with." Her throat tightened. Later, as stars blinked into place, Elam didn't go to his usual room. He stood at Maribeth's door and knocked once. "I ain't asking for more than you're ready for," he said. "But if there's room beside you, I'd like to wake up knowing you're near." She opened the door, and without a word, she made room for him. They slept like that side by side, no grand declarations. Just the quiet breathing of two people who had been emptied, and were now at last being filled. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive in fireworks. Sometimes it comes like the dawn, soft, certain, and enough. What if the love we thought had passed us by was just waiting in a quieter place? Would you like to hear another story like this one? Tell us in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, Please like, share, and subscribe to None Wild West Saga. Sometimes life doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in a dusty wagon, with a man who simply says, "You can ride with me if you like." Maribeth didn't get the love story she dreamed of when she was 20. But at 58, she got something deeper: respect without performance, a home without judgment, and a quiet man who saw her, not as a burden, but as a blessing. And maybe that's what hope really is. Not a second chance to be young again, but a first chance to be chosen just as you are. So if you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever waited on your own platform, unsure if anyone would come, may this story remind you it's never too late. If this touched something tender in you, consider subscribing to None Wild West Saga. We share stories not of perfect people, but of people who keep showing up despite the cracks. Tell us in the comments, would you like to see what happens next in Maribeth and Alam's life? Or more stories about women who were told they were too old, too plain, too late, until someone saw they were just enough. Don't forget to like, share, and let your heart stay open. We're building a little frontier of kindness here, and you're always welcome.